Hello and welcome back to the Cricket Draft Show for episode 2. The three of us, we did such a good job last week that John and Dante have invited us back for episode 2, which is great. And we've got more Big Bash preview news to talk about following the episode last week. We're going to go through predicted or probable 11s for the 8 BBL sides. And we've got some questions from you guys as well, which we will open with. We'll open with a question from Super Giants Fanatics, which came through on X. So if you are and you're interested, you'll drop us a comment on this video, like it for us, subscribe to the channel, interact with us on Instagram and TikTok and X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it, and we will come back to you. We will address the questions, and unless we end up with thousands, we might struggle because we'll be on it for about 3 hours. But the first question for the floor, for everybody, is who do you think are going to be the top 2 teams in the BBL this year? Chris Dixon, I'm going to throw to you first. And you get your first pick. Obviously, we can pick the same teams, but you get to go first.
So when you crunch all the numbers together and kind of look who's the favourites, I'm going to go with the Perth Scorchers. They seem to have the best team overall, and not necessarily as strong maybe as favourites as they have been in previous years. They've had really strong teams, but I still reckon they've got the team. If you look at the data and you put it all together, and they're the team that comes first there. And then in the second place, it's the other perennial, seems to be always favourites, Sydney Sixers. It seems to be those two teams always really the year on year there or thereabouts. Big followings, seem to get the good overseas, good structures there, and they've won the most titles between them. So they're the two sides I'm going to go with. When you crunch all the numbers together, they seem to come up with those two as the favourites.
Fantastic. We got Dan Weston on a makeshift background over in Croatia at the moment, committed to the cause. So apologies if it doesn't look a little bit as clean as what it did last week. But Dan, are you in agreement with Chris there with those two, or are you thinking anywhere else from Perth and Sydney?
Yeah, so what I did was we had a chat about the expected 11s for each team, which obviously we're going to get into in next few minutes. And I built a model which valued each team's potential 11s that we think they're going to play in week 1, and how that worked out as if they're playing an individual match. And Scorchers, I definitely agree with Chris, are going to be up there. Possibly a little bit of a concern for me about their spin bowling, but I think that they're very, very strong. With regards to other teams, though, I actually quite like the Hobart Hurricanes. I think they've got a decent bowling attack this year. Bringing in Waqar Salamkhail for Rishad Hussain is definitely not a downgrade with the ball either. And I think he'll potentially do really, really well against domestic players who are not necessarily the best players at spin. So I think Salamkhail could be a really astute pickup for them. And they've got a batch of very consistent point scorers, and model-wise, all of them have got over 30 points per game expected points, which is pretty good. So I like the Hurricanes. I think the Sydney Thunder are an interesting proposition as well. Sort of hedging my bets a little bit there. That they've got a decent bowling lineup, which tends to be a big driver of success for T20 franchises, and that's something that I really, really like. Although they're gonna need some reinforcements potentially with the bat.
Yeah, I mean, unsurprisingly, the Perth Scorchers are one of my 2 teams. You can't really look past that seam bowling attack of Jai Richardson, AJ Tye, Jason Behrendorff, and Lance Morris. Just feels like an absolute nightmare. If you had the prospect to go and open the batting or bat against those 4 seamers, you'd be in for it would be a tough day. And the Hurricanes as well, Dan. The Sixers you can't look past, but the Hurricanes with that top 5, that top 6 that they've built together there with the experience of Wade, Ben McDermott that we've seen over here in the Blast as well. Shai Hope added to that team, and he's arguably one of the best international white ball cricketers in the world at the moment. Just looks really, really strong. I'd love to have said the Brisbane Heat, but no, absolutely not. Couldn't do it. Couldn't do it to them. I could not do it to them. Anyway, right, there's the first question answered. Thank you very much to the Super Giants Fanatics for sending that one through. If you have got any questions, of course, drop them in and we will address them in the next episode. The next episode, of course, we will be announcing the teams that we will be starting this Big Bash game with. And the game I can announce for you today, which I'm delighted about, is that we'll be live at 7 a.m. on Monday, the 9th of December. So you'll have a few days to get your team ready before the first game, which I believe is on the 15th. We need to go through these teams. I'm going to go through. I'm going to do the easy bit. I'm just going to list them out, and I'm going to hope that I get the names right. And then I'm going to throw to you guys and tell me where, Dan, you think they're going to finish up in this tournament. And Chris, I'd like you to kind of put your kind of fantasy hat on here and kind of go, is this team actually going to be any good if we put this in the Cricket Draft app for the Big Bash this winter? But we're going to start with the Adelaide Strikers. We're going to go alphabetical order. There's no favourites here. We're going to start with Short and Short at the top of the order. We've got Darcy Short in at number 2. Chris Lynn, the experienced Big Bash, moved over from Brisbane Heat a couple of seasons ago. Weatherold, Overton, Nielsen, Allen, Doggett, Thornton, Boyce and Pope for the Strikers. Dan, what do you think about that team?
I think for me, it's going to be difficult to see them coming in the top couple of teams. They've got a new coach with Tim Payne taking his first job as a T20 coach, so that'll be an interesting one to see how he changes the strategy from Jason Gillespie, who's been there for a number of years previously. For me, I struggle to see them coming in that top few, just primarily because of their bowling, pace bowling in particular. I think would be my concern. Should expect decent amount of points from the top 5 though, if we're looking from fancy perspective. Jamie Overton, if he's bowling in particular, should be a prolific point scorer.
Can you give me a number 1 through 8? I'm gonna put you on the spot now, Dan.
I want there's 7.
Number 7. Okay, Chris, how about yourself, sir? How do they line up as a fantasy team? If of course this beautiful game wasn't played on those amazing stadiums over in Australia and it was all played on an app on your mobile phone or the web browser, whichever you chose to do, how do you think the Strikers would get on?
So when I'm looking at these teams, I'm looking purely from an individual basis because, of course, when you're looking at these, 11s and who's going to be the best 11, it's not necessarily who's going to be the best fantasy players, and I'm trying to pick the best 11 fantasy players for my team. So first of all, I'm looking at Matt Short from the Adelaide Strikers team. He's had a great last 4 or 5 years in the Big Bash and now internationally capped. And obviously, in terms of finding out which category he's going to be in, is he going to be a batter? Is he going to be an all-rounder? If he's a batter, then he's going to offer a lot more value because there's some potential for bowling points as well, because he does bowl the odd over, maybe in the power play, and they'll bowl 1 or 2 overs on average a game, and that really increases his value to a team. And then after that, I'm looking at Jamie Overton, who's going to bat relatively high up the order, maybe 5, 6-ish. Very high strike rate with the bat, which is very important with the fantasy game. I'm looking for high strike rate players rather than low strike rate players with a high average. And bowling is done quite well over the last few years as well, so these we're looking for there. And Henry Thornton's quite an interesting one. He's got quite a high economy rate, but he's very wickety. He takes a lot of wickets. His strike rate is quite high with the ball, so while he may not get the economy rate bonuses, he may well get you quite a few wickets as well there. So there's some of the players in that team that I'll be looking for in my fantasy team.
I'm noting them down. As we go through. We're going to move up to the Brisbane Heat and we're going to go through their 11 or their probable 11 as to what we think they're going to line up as we go. Colin Monroe, the captain, with Jimmy Pearson at the top of the order. Matt Renshaw, Max Bryant, Tom Alsop, Paul Walter. I'm interested to hear your thoughts about the overseas recruitment for those guys. Xavier Bartlett, Prestwich, Spencer Johnson, Swepson and Kuhneman. Dan, how are you excited by the Brisbane Heat?
I think that they'll do okay. I mean, obviously, defending champions, they won the group stage last year and then won the tournament as well. They've lost Sam Billings to Thunder, which I think is a bit of a blow. Knowing Sam and how he operates, he's very, very smart in terms of tactically and motivational. The way he talks and in the game, I don't know if anyone's heard when they're watching the games on TV, you can't stop hearing him talking. And so maybe they'll lose a little bit of that. They've brought in Tom Alsop, who's not quite like for like because he's not really keeping as much as he used to. So they're probably going to have to play Jimmy Pearson more than they did previously, which not necessarily a huge positive for them. My concerns for them probably focus on their hitting ability in the top order and what could be a pretty long tail if we're looking at Xavier Bartlett as a number 7. But the strengths-wise, I mean, Bartlett and Johnson as pace bowlers is going to be pretty much as good as it gets in this comp as a pace duo. Paul Walter contributing well, and I think he'll be a high point scorer in this game as well. I went with qualification coming 4th.
Fantastic. We've got the first one making the playoffs. Chris, How about that 11 as potential picks for a fantasy team?
Yeah, so I agree with Dan. I think they're maybe lacking a bit of firepower in terms of strike rate with the bat. There's not many players that are averaging, that 150, 160 mark with the bat that can really either finish the game or, take the game away in the power play, like maybe Melbourne Renegades coming up, as we will speak about later, have. But I'm always looking at these all-rounder slots. Who are these all-rounders in these teams that I could have if Brisbane Heat have a double game week? And they've got Paul Walter, who's not necessarily the best batter, not necessarily the best bowler, but when you do both and then you've maybe got a double game week, he may be someone I'll look to bring in. He's going to feature in two aspects of the game and maybe be a captain pick if Brisbane Heat have a double game week and another team doesn't. And Michael Neese, who's injured, who's probably not going to be fit for the start of the tournament. If he gets fit later in the tournament, he's another potential option that I'd be looking to bring in, who's really done well the last few years with both bat and ball and can offer me another all-rounder slot for Brisbane Heat.
Options. There's just so many options. There's no right or wrong way to build these fancy teams up, and I think that's what makes it so much fun when you set these teams and leagues up with your mates and you're arguing as to who you're going to pick. The Hobart Hurricanes are next, and I dare say I think we're probably all going to be a little bit excited about these guys, bearing in mind on the introduction that we just had. But Matthew Wade, Ben McDermott at the top of the order. Then we go into Jewel Hope, David Chowdhury is the middle order, Chris Jordan, Dooley Ellis. Apologies about the pronunciation here if I don't get it right, but Salam Keel at number 10 with Riley Meredith to round out that 11 over in Tasmania. Shall I just put them down at number 1 for you, Dan? Shall I put that down as first, or do you want to have a bit more of a discussion about the Hurricanes?
Well, as I think I said earlier, with the 11s that we've got as kind of those predicted 11s, they modelled to be the number 1 team, and it was by a reasonable distance as well, with sort of consistent points producers for every single one of those players in the 11. You've got Wade or McDermott fighting over the gloves at the top of the order. You've got Tim David, Nikhil Chowdhury, Chris Jordan, all looking to contribute with particularly the latter two with both bat and ball. David taking some high strike rate honours, and they've got really, really good pace bowling options with Jordan, Ellis, Meredith. Salam Keel I expect to do pretty well as a spinner as well in this comp. So I think they've got the bowling taken care of quite nicely. 6-7 options with the bowling. And I think I've got to go with them as number 1 based on the model, but I would throw in that slight warning that this is generally a team that's underperformed the sum of their parts quite consistently over the last 5 years or so. So, yeah, no guarantees for sure.
No. Hopefully Hobart aren't looking back too much in the history books and they're going to write their name into it this year instead. Chris, if Dan's kind of analogy of the Hobart Hurricanes got anything to go by, I feel like this could be a team that you're kind of fighting over which of these Hurricanes players you're going to try and put in your team.
Yeah, so I'm going to start with Chris Jordan. Again, a player that can bat a bit and bowl, so it's probably going to be batting, 6-7-ish, maybe depending on the situation for Hobart Hurricanes. And his batting numbers have actually significantly improved over the last maybe 3 or 4 years. If you looked at his numbers maybe 3 or 4 years ago, they weren't that good. But now, over the last few years, he's averaging, I think, above 20 and striking, way above 140, 150 in some competitions. So he's another option that's going to get you some points there. And again, be interested to see what category. He's one of those that could be a bowler in the game or could be an all-rounder. So it'd be interesting to see what category he's in. Obviously, he's a bowler, then he offers a lot more value. So I'll definitely be looking to get him in there. Shai Hope's another one that's actually quite interesting. Similar to Jordan, his batting numbers in T20 cricket have actually improved significantly over the last few years. Maybe 3 years ago, his numbers, he was striking at around the 120 mark, and he really needed to take that strike rate to a next level, which has now seen him get back into the West Indies fold and get some of these overseas gigs across the world. And so it'd be interesting if his price reflects that, if his price reflects the fact that, maybe his numbers weren't as good, or it reflects the fact that he's been in good form recently over the last few years, and then, looking at maybe he's another player to bring in if he's offers a bit of value there. And Riley Meredith's another bowler that's, quite wickety, so he's likely to get a lot of wickets there in terms of his strike rate. Not necessarily the most economical, but if you're wanting someone that's going to bag you maybe a 3 or 4 wicket haul in 1 or 2 games, then he might be an option there with the ball.
I'm really enjoying the word wickety adding into this episode. It's fantastic. I love it, and everybody knows exactly what it means. It doesn't need any explanation. The Melbourne Renegades are the team on the block next, and I think we're going to be fairly excited about at least their opening pair. I'm quite excited about one of their overseas players from this side as well. But we're going to open up with the two guys that we spoke so highly about last week. We're going to go Brown and Fraser McGurk with Tim Seifert, Laurie Evans, Harvey Wells, Sutherland, Rogers, O'Neill, Richardson, and Zampa. Zampa still feels strange to me that he should be wearing a green jersey, but as it is, he's over there with the Renegades. Dan Weston, I dare say I don't think you're going to be as hyped up about the Renegades as you are about the Hurricanes.
Sorry to dampen that enthusiasm a little bit, Dan. Yeah, it for me, like this is the dictionary definition of a volatile team. This is a team who, opening batting with Josh Brown, Jake Fraser McGurk, they could be 100 for 0 off 7 overs, 8 overs, but they could also be 0 for 2 after the first over, and in big trouble. And then you've got to rely on Seifert and Evans to try and rebuild. I just don't really see the love for this team with their bowling in particular, the pace bowling. Zampa will guarantee get wickets if he plays every game. I'm sure of that. He's really evolved, I think, to a top 3 leg spinner in the world right now. And I just a little bit concerned about their paces. I think Sutherland's an interesting player for this game, someone who potentially could bat higher up the order than people might expect as well. I know that's something that they might be trying to find a role for him to do as well. So that's a potential angle for someone on this game as well.
What do you reckon? 1 to 8?
6.
6. Renegades fans are going to riot in the comments. Chris, how about yourself? Are there players in that Renegades 11 that you're thinking about putting in your fantasy team, or are they a team that you're going to look to avoid?
It's certainly very volatile, as Dan said, especially in the batting. So, that opening partnership is going to be very interesting to see, which way they go. I'm sure there'll be plenty of times they do get off to a flyer and plenty of times they don't. But ultimately, they've got high strike rates. So if they come off in a few games and you've got them in and they get a quick 50 or a quick 100, you're going to really make a big bag of points there. So I would actually be looking for those, one of those openers, or maybe both of those openers, as and when they have a double game week, or just in general, if they've got a good run of fixtures, they may be ones to bring in if you're looking to play catch up or you want to play that risky game. If they get a quick fire lot of runs, then they'll be good there. Laurie Evans is another one that I think he's quite good. He's done quite well in the Big Bash for the Perth Scorchers, obviously now moving to Melbourne there. He's another one you might want to get in, be interesting where he bats. He's batted in loads of different positions in T20 cricket over the last few years, Laurie Evans. And of course, they've got Jacob Bethel joining them after the Test series there, so he'll be one that potentially is a good one that will certainly strengthen their middle order, which looks quite weak apart from the 3 I mentioned before. It looks quite weak, and Tim Seifert's okay, but they lack a bit of depth, and the likes of John O'Wells, his strike rate isn't that high, so there's not really that firepower finishing off the innings there. So there's some of the players that I'll be looking for in that team.
Just adding a bit more volatility to that batting lineup. I mean, why would you not want to add more to it? Staying in Melbourne, the Melbourne Stars are next. This team, for me anyway, when the Big Bash started, they were kind of like the Galacticos of the competition, weren't they? And I feel they might have just fallen off a touch since then. But Rogers and Joe Clark will be opening the batting. Webster, Maxwell, Stoinis, Cartwright through the middle. Tom Curran, the big signing, the big steal from the Sixers, and one that we spoke so highly about last week, and I dare say we'll get a bit more airtime today. Paris, McKenzie, Couch, and Steckety to round out the Melbourne Stars. Do you reckon they're going to fare any better than their Melbourne counterparts, Dan, or are they going to be down that bottom end as well?
I think it could be a tough season for Stars. To be honest with you, we talked about Hobart Hurricanes being a team that sort of performs below the sum of their parts. Well, this Stars, I think, have historically done that to an even greater degree. I have a few issues in terms of both point scoring and general sort of drivers' success that they've got in their lineup. They've got without Osama Mir, who I think is unavailable for the start of the comp. They lack a real frontline proven spinner. Pacer wise, I think it is tough to really be positive on them. Steckety's not been fit much recently, and is coming into this comp pretty pretty cold in terms of T20 game time. Brodie Couch is an interesting one because I know that there's some people who think that he's got quite a lot of potential. He actually got into the auction list of the IPL and can hit some high pace. The other concern to me, probably looking at how their team combines, is injury to Glenn Maxwell and who comes in for him, and also both Webster and Cartwright being very low strikers against spin. So if I'm an opposition team, or I'm looking to match up spin against this Stars team probably, and actually you could look at that as a potential angle for the cricket draft players as well, because if you've got an opposition, if you know that they're playing against a team who've got a strong opposition spinner, that might be something that you might want to look at as well. So look, the bowling for me looks weak. For me, that's the big red flag for this squad, and I've got them coming 8th.
I thought you might have. I already had that penciled in. Just I had a feeling that's the way you were going towards them with the Stars. Chris, before I kind of hand over to you, with what Dan's just said about the Melbourne Stars and a potential underperforming side here that's maybe not particularly well balanced, does that have any impact on a likelihood to pick someone like Tom Curran? Someone who we spoke about so highly last week, about the perfect player because he bats further up the order, he whacks it, he bowls, he takes wickets, he's a great fielder. If they're not doing very well, does that kind of turn you off Tom Curran a little bit?
Not really. When I'm making my team, I'm trying to get basically the best individuals that are going to get the most points. But the only time where I would take that into consideration is towards the back end of the tournament, when you're trying to strategize. You're wanting the teams that are going to go through to have those players to maybe save some of the transfers that you might need to take out the players that you don't have, depending on how many you have and things like that and other variables. So certainly for the first kind of 4/5 of the tournament, I wouldn't really be thinking of that. I'd just be trying to get in the best players week by week and maximise on those double game weeks. And I agree with Dan. I think overall this Melbourne Stars team is quite weak. It's probably the weakest in the tournament. But in terms of fancy, I actually do really like some of the players. Got Maxwell when he's fit, got Stoinis, got Tom Curran. These all-rounder slots that I love to fill in, aggressive batters that are going to bowl a bit. And, there's 3 players there that I really would be looking to get in, Maxwell, Stoinis and Curran in my team there for those reasons. And also got Ben Duckett joining them after the England series there. So that's another player that's potentially you might want to think of when he joins up with them.
You're going to be spoiled for choice for all-rounders. I know you can only pick 4 to actually put in your starting 11, but I think you might have listed about 12 so far, and we've still got 3 teams to go. Perth Scorchers are up next, another one of the teams that the 3 of us kind of thought would perform really nicely. Alan Jennings, Hardy, Hurst, Turner, Hobson, Spores, Richardson, Ty, Berendorf and Morris is the probable 11 for the Perth Scorchers. As I say, they've had a bit of airtime already so far, but Dan, just add to that. I'm going to guess that you're going to put them in second place, but what's the reasoning behind that?
Yeah, I actually do. You're quite right, Dan. Second prediction for me. The reasoning primarily is something that Scorchers have always been strong at, which is a very good pace bowling lineup, which has been a consistent theme of their success in the Big Bash. Richardson, Ty, Berendorf, Morris, close to being as good a quartet as you could find at this level. The concern probably would be Richardson and Morris's injury proneness, which is something that I think the TCD players might want to bear in mind at some points. Whether they, I would be surprised if they played every single game in the comp, put it that way. Spin would be an issue maybe as well. We might have to rely on Spores, who's not played Big Bash before, to contribute in that area. But I think batting-wise as well, pretty strong. We've got, there's other players to come in like Josh Inglis as well. Very, very high-quality operators. Top five should be pretty decent point scorers overall. And I'm positive about their chances.
Fantastic. And Chris, who out of that 11 would you be looking at as potential picks in your fantasy side?
I quite like Finn Allen. He's kind of similar to the kind of Fraser McGurk mould there, with an aggressive opener with a high strike rate that if he comes off in a few games over the course of the season, he's going to do well, when he may not necessarily be the most consistent over the course of the season. If he gets a few big knocks at a high strike rate, he'll do well there. And I'm quite interested in Matty Hurst, where he's going to bat and what price he's going to be as well. Because if he's batting up the order, he's shown some promise in the hundreds in the Blast, and good young player there. If he's batting up the order, he may do well in maybe a slightly cheaper option that you might want to consider in your teams there. And I agree, they're quite weak on the spin department. Perth isn't necessarily where you're going to need many spinners anyway, but they may struggle a bit, not having that frontline spinner that maybe some of the other teams do have.
Yeah, I mean, having had the pleasure of watching Ashton Agar a lot last summer for the Steelbacks, they've got him up their sleeve, and he is a fantastic cricketer to be able to add into that 11. Sydney Sixers, again, another one of the teams that the three of us spoke highly about at the beginning of this episode, but they will line up, or probable line up, as follows. It'll be James Vince, Philippi, Patterson, Enriques as the captain, Silk, Edwards, Manetti, Sean Abbott, Ben Dwarshuis, Jaffa Chauhan, who I think all of us are going to be really excited to see. And then Jackson Bird, who feels like he's been around for donkeys of years, will kind of round out that 11. Dan, over to you on the Sydney Sixers.
I think that they're going to be fighting for the top 4, but I'm not necessarily as convinced as others about them being guaranteed to get in that top 4 and qualifying for the later stages. I think they've got some very high expected point scorers. I'm looking at guys like James Vince, who's a consistent churner out of run volume, a reasonable strike rate. Abbott and Dwarshuis should contribute with both bat and ball. Chauhan, as you mentioned, Dan, is someone who I think is really interesting in terms of his background and his story as to how he got into professional cricket. And actually, as I said earlier, overseas spinners have tended to go really, really quite well in this comp. And I think that he could be another one to add to that list of players. The problem for them really is they've got sort of what I would call like 6 really good players, and then it drops off quite a lot after that. Menenti, Patterson don't really excite me. Silk's a great fielder, but has typically not produced points as much as I would like with the bat and had an impact on games. Edwards still a little unproven. Philippi arguably has dropped off a little bit over the last couple of years. So there's a bit of a mixed bag of a squad really there in terms of that 11 that you've mentioned.
Yeah, and I think by process of elimination, I've got them in 3rd for you.
No, 5th.
5th? Okay. Well, I mean, I've gone early there, haven't I? I've bolted. I've got my numbers the wrong way around. Chris, who are you looking at in that Sixers lineup then as fantasy options?
So for once, I'm not going to mention an all-rounder. I'm actually going to go with Chauhan. He's quite an interesting pick. He's got really good stats in his short T20 career so far, and maybe quite a cheaper option because he's relatively unknown. But I reckon he'll do really well, especially in Sydney. Sydney is the SCG is out of all the grounds probably one that's most conducive to spin. It's been quite slow and turning in recent years, so I reckon he's gone to the right team there, and he could be a really good pick, especially if he's a cheaper option there.
Yeah, no, fantastic. And we'll round out with the final team, the Sydney Thunder. We'll go David Warner, Cam Bancroft, Nick Maddison, Sam Billings, Davies, Rutherford, Sams, Chris Green as the captain, Wes Agar, Sangha and Ferguson to round out that 11. And this Sydney team, Dan, this is the one I think I've got you down for 3rd place.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, absolutely. Look, I don't think that it's a guarantee at all, but because they've got quite an aging top order, and a top order that perhaps doesn't thrill me at all. But I look at them and I see batting depth. Rutherford, Sams and Green at 6, 7, 8 is about as good as it gets in this comp. And their bowling conditions, if they're all fit, which is a little bit of a stretch to say that they're all going to be fit all of the time, cover pace and spin so well. Sams, Wes Agar and Lockie Ferguson with pace, and Chris Green and Tanveer Sangha is probably as good a spin duo as you're going to find in this comp. So realistically, I think they've got bowling locks, which is a big driver of success, as I mentioned earlier. Probably a little bit of a question mark about where they get their 6th bowler from. I wouldn't want to rely on Sherfane Rutherford too much with that responsibility, but they don't really have any other options in that 11 that you mentioned. So there's still a few worries for sure. Top order batting and the 6th bowler, but overall, if 5 bowlers are fit for them, they might not need it.
Yeah, they seem like they're set up fairly well. And Chris, of this 11, which of the players kind of excite you? Who are you looking at, and why is it Dan Sams?
Dan Sams is interesting. He's got a very high strike rate, but his average isn't necessarily quite quite there, and it'd be interesting to see where he bats. Probably batting, 6, 7-ish. But yeah, I'll certainly try to get him in when they've got double game weeks, but he doesn't quite stand out as much as maybe some of the all-rounders in the other sides. Quite like Tanvisanga as a spinner as well. He's not necessarily the most household name in the domestic, Australian circuit, but I reckon he's really handy at Team 20, and his numbers prove it, so he might be a good one to pick up for not too much there. And then they've got quite a powerful kind of middle-low order, kind of Rutherford, Sams, Green's batting's really picked up in the last few years. McAndrew can hit a long ball. So, towards the end of the innings, they could be quite powerful if they've got wickets in hand with that middle to low order there.
Plenty of options. Well, there we go. There are the probable 11s for the 8 Big Bash sides ahead of the tournament. Things can change. We know that there are players coming back into the tournament. We know there's a couple of injuries kind of floating around. So it is going to be fairly flexible. But based on what we've gone through, we have officially predicted that the Hobart Hurricanes will win the Big Bash this season, with the Perth Scorchers coming second and the Sydney Thunder coming third. So you can bookmark it now. And then once they have done it, you can come back and you can tell us kind of how right we all were. And that'll be nice, won't it? There are a couple of questions for the three of us just to round this episode off before we call it time. The first question, which I'll answer really quickly, and this is from FPL Wilson 29, just asked the question of what the values for Matt Short and James Vince are, and I can kind of confirm to you now that Matt Short is going to be 8.5 million and James Vince is 7.9. So if that helps start planning your squads out, hopefully that's helpful. And the final question for you really quickly, I don't think we need to dwell on it too much, just need a player name from all of us, is what overseas player are you most looking forward to seeing? And that's come from Rishab on X. Chris, I'll go to you first. What overseas player are you most excited to see in the Big Bash this winter?
Well, answering from a fantasy perspective or from a playing perspective?
just your personal preference.
I quite like Finn Allen, the way he goes out and just smashes it. He'll be quite an interesting one to watch. Shafane Rutherford is another one that'd be quite interesting to watch. See how he adapts to the Big Bash and those pitches out there. So yeah, I'll go with that.
One of those guys. Dan, yourself?
Well, I think last episode we kind of focused on the English players, and obviously the standout Chris and I both agreed on was Tom Curran. But I think if we're going a little bit more niche and going away from the English overseas players, of which there are plenty of them, I think the one player I'm really interested in how he will perform is Hassan Khan, who's just been signed as a short notice replacement at Melbourne Renegades. Bowls, but bats sort of top 6 batter who bowls spin as well. So for this game, he looks like a really valuable contributor actually, in terms of being able to hit sixes at high strike rate and own contributions with the ball. The caveat is that the vast majority of his appearances so far have either come in PSL back in the day when he was really young, and more recently in the MLC. So it's a gamble for sure to see that he will definitely perform at this level. However, it's a player that I'm really, really excited about in terms of potentially offering some value for money in the marketplace.
Yeah, well, for me, everybody loves a wrist spinner. And I know, obviously, all of us English fans watching this are desperate to figure out if England are going to find out a replacement for Adil Rashid eventually in white ball cricket. So I'm going to have my eyes kind of pinned solely on Jaffa Chauhan, because I want to see more of him. I want to see if he's going to step up to that next level. I want to see how his career develops. And I think this Big Bash is going to be a really interesting tournament for him to put himself on. Relatively, I know he's played in the 100, the Blast, but I think when you go as an overseas player, you just kind of up that stage slightly, don't you? And I'm excited. And I like the Sydney Sixers, and the SCG is a cool place to play cricket. And I'm sure Jaffa Chauhan's really excited to go and do that. But look, everybody, thank you so much for sticking with us through the episode. We appreciate your company throughout episode 2 of the Big Bash series on the Cricket Draft Show. If you have any questions, as I say, about any of those teams, anything really, prices, would you pick this player or that player, anything like that, please do get in contact with us on here, on X, on Instagram, on TikTok, whatever it might be. Drop us a follow, like the content as well, it'll be massively helpful. And we'll see you next time, where the game week will be live. As I said, it is live on Monday at 7 a.m. UK time, where the three of us, 2 experts and myself, will put together our Big Bash fantasy teams for the opening game week. And I'm quite excited to get stuck in. I feel like I've learned quite a lot from you two guys already. And whether it transpires into my fantasy team or not, I don't know. But we'll give it a good go. Anyway, chaps, thank you so much. And we'll see you next time.